So, Cam, when did you first become interested in aviation?
All my life, ever since we were a kid, I was attracted to anything that had an airplane in it, whether it was a movie or a cartoon. It's just one of those things that is instinctual, I think, for most people, and certainly it was for me. But as the years wore on through the teenage years, it just continued to grow on me until one day. Cold wintry day, 1978, a fellow bartender at TGI Fridays back then.
Wow.
It was only Fridays in Texas. He decided, he got his pilot's license. He asked me if I want to go on an airplane ride. And I couldn't believe it that he's talking about a real airplane. I didn't know anything about how all of that worked. And took me to a local airport on a cold, wintry day. Scared the kaboojis out of me, and when we landed 30 minutes later, I said, "This is it. This is what I want to do for the rest of my life."
So, yeah, did you always want to become like an airline pilot rather than a military pilot?
Yeah, well, that was always the dream, but it was so far-fetched. Back in the 70s and the 80s, at least the 70s when I was growing up and thinking about the field, there was really not that many opportunities. Most of the airlines were not, hiring. When they were hiring, it was just few people. It was 1978 that when deregulation hit, that airlines for the first time started charging whatever they wanted to do, started flying to markets that they wanted to do. So deregulation was wonderful for a lot of airlines and catastrophic for others. Braniff and Eastern and Pan Am, they all went out of business while others, American Airlines, Delta, United, grew. And so it wasn't until then that I realized that this is a possibility, that this is something that I can do, and when the opportunity came, I went running.
Yeah, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of things. How did you start becoming an airline pilot? Because obviously it's a very expensive process. So how did you get into it?
It's not as expensive and as difficult as you would think it is. Not in the United States. It is expensive. Absolutely, it's expensive. But then again, so is going to college. Doing a lot of things that one does. Especially today when, there's all kinds of opportunities in financing and what the airlines are paying with the pilot shortage, what they're able to do to try and get more and more people into aviation. But back in the 1970s, late 70s and early 80s, there was just two ways to do it. It was, the military or general aviation. And I chose general aviation. And back then it was just simply, getting your licenses. There's a series of licenses to get. About 8 or 10 of them, teaching flying for a while, teaching anything that had to do with flying for a while. And then essentially working your way into, the higher up, bigger airplanes, more engines, jet type aircraft. And that was the other way to do that. And that's what I chose. So for me, I got all of my licenses. I taught flying for, about a year. Opportunity came to go get a job somewhere else in Michigan and then on to Texas. And you essentially got up and you went wherever the opportunity was. Wherever somebody let you fly a bigger plane and paid you for it, or a more complicated airplane or one with more engines or anything like that. So I just essentially went around the country and got to fly bigger and bigger airplanes and more complex machines. And by the time I got into the jets, the Learjet, and upgraded to a captain in a Learjet, that was 1983 or something like that. Now you were qualified to be an airline pilot. So, and it also happened to be when the airlines were, had started to hiring. The regulation had finally, taken its course, and some airlines were expanding pretty rapidly. American Airlines was one of them. And so I went through the interview process, and there we were.
Cam, can you tell us the process of becoming an airline pilot?
Well, in the United States, it's a pretty simple process, really. It's just you get your licenses. If you're going through the military, that's a whole different thing. But there's fewer and fewer people going through the military. The military is not hiring as many, training as many pilots, with the drones and with everything else that's going on. So that's becoming a lesser, less traveled route for a lot of the pilots. But if you're going up the general aviation route, you just get your licenses. And, today it's very different than it was 35, 40 years ago. There are schools that you can go to, and you can get your licenses one after the next. They'll finance everything. They'll train you from very beginning to the very end. They'll help you get your first job. And very quickly, you can get a job in a commuter, for example. And commuter is essentially training grounds at this point. Not many pilots want to go into a commuter and make that a career. But they go there and they get their time. They move them from the right seat, the co-pilot seat, into the left seat, the captain seat. And it's a matter of time. With the pilot shortage the way it is right now, it's pretty incredible. They've talked about it for 40 years, even longer than that. But now it's absolutely true. It's coming, to fruition. And you can see it. So we're given that, it's just a matter of time before somebody's generally picked up. A lot of the airlines have reduced or eliminated some of the requirements that they had, whether it was height or weight or sight, 4-year degrees, etc. So it's a great time. If somebody, has that desire, that want to be an airline pilot, this is a great time to be doing it. And it's not for everybody. Having said that, I just want to point that out. It's not a life for everyone that's out there. It sounds exciting and glamorous, and to a certain extent it is. But it's also a hard life. You're not coming home for dinner every night. You're not when you have a wife and kids and whatever, you will miss events. You're all going to see sunrises far more than you want to, and time zones, et cetera, et cetera. So there's hardship to go through. And not to mention that you probably will not live where you want to live because you got to go where the airline has bases. But having said all of that, if someone is willing to plow through that and have that desire to still want to be an airline pilot, it's a great field, and it's one that I would not have changed for the world.
When you were going through your basic training, as it were, did you get put with one instructor, or were you interchanging right there?
So again, when I did it, it was a question of finances, so you flew when you had enough money, and you flew with whoever you had to, wherever you had to. It was not an organized effort. It was just really winging it and doing the best that you could. It's very different now. You can go in and a brand new guy who's never been in an airplane can pick, an aviation college, Embry-Riddle, for example, and go in there and they'll help you with a 4-year degree, and while you're doing that, they'll make sure they'll take you through all of your ratings and all of your, licenses and everything. So by the time you graduate, in a 4-year degree, you also have all of your pilot's licenses, and you can just jump in and get a job. In that case, it's far more organized. Today, it's far more organized. So if you have the means, if you have the money, and the time and the dedication, yeah, you can be. It is very organized. But if you don't, as was the case for me in the 70s and the 80s, you used tip money to learn how to fly. So when you had enough money to get the next hour of flying, you did, and it was quite a bit different.
And you mentioned the Learjet there, what a classic aeroplane. What was that like to fly, Kam?
It's the closest thing. A Learjet, to me, was the closest thing that it came to a fighter pilot position. The earlier Lear models, the 23 model series was the very first Lear series, I believe it was. And it's a rocket ship. It's a fast airplane. And it's a small airplane. It was a very unstable airplane. I flew Bill Lear's the plane that he flew. And it had so many afterthoughts in it, so many switches that they had added on to it for, to create stability, etc.
Right.
And then the later models became, a lot better, a lot, somewhat easier, but they were far better, superior machines. But they were always very fast. They go up very high, very quick, and they use a lot of fuel. So fuel management was always a big concern here, especially in the earlier series. When we flew a lot of cargo, we flew, middle of the night stuff, where it was up to the pilots themselves to kind of figure out, your flight plans, weather, et cetera. And if something went wrong, it was up to you to figure it out. Not like airlines where you have multiple departments and dispatch and others that are going to help you figure all that out. It was up to the pilot. They figured everything out. So in flying in a Learjet, managing all of that, making sure that if something goes wrong, you have an alternative because you just don't have that much gas in those earlier series. So most of the fuel in the Learjets are in the tip tanks. And so you can see if there was back then, at least in the earlier series again, if there was a fuel issue and one of the tanks emptied and the other one stayed full, you would have a problem because the fuel is at the very edge of your tanks. But another thing about those tanks is, in some of the places that I worked at, we had to fuel our own airplanes. The flying was done at 2 in the morning. And, I was working for an outfit in Kenosha, Wisconsin in the middle of the winter. That gets pretty cold. So you're out there, we'd pull up a car right to the wingtip. One of the pilots would jump out and then start the fueling process, be freezing his butt off, doesn't matter how many layers of clothes you were. And he'd change every minute or so. He'd jump back in the car and the other guy would go out and do the next 100 gallons or something, and we did that, and that was the thing. But yes, it's a very distinctive mark of a Learjet is the the tip tanks that are out there.
And was it a 2-man crew at the time?
All jets are 2-man crews. In fact, no jet in the United States, I can't imagine it's different anywhere else. There is no jet that can be flown with one pilot.
Right.
The exception to that was the very earliest Cessna Citation model, I believe, and that was a long time ago. But if it's a jet aircraft, or I believe the rule at that point was 12,500 pounds. If the gross weight is to over 12,500 pounds, then it has to have 2 pilots. Something like that. I'm just kind of reaching in my memory here. But yeah, and then major airlines too. Major airlines were always 3 pilots. They had a flight engineer. That seat and that panel has been removed. It's now just 2 pilots. They might take 3 or 4 with them, depending on the length of the flight, like we did LA to London flights. But it's a minimum of 2 at any given time.
And if I'm correct in saying you were a flight engineer, was it on the DC-9 and DC-10? Like, what was that like?
So DC-9 did not have a flight engineer. A DC-10 did. And the 727s did, and L-1011s, a whole series of airplanes before that, 707s. What was it like? About 80 or 90% of the people who worked that panel were actual pilots, and then that was just a process that they went through.
Right.
And you started in that seat, and you worked your way from the 3rd seat to the 2nd seat, which is the right side, co-pilot, and then moved on to the left seat, the captain. About 10 or 15% of these guys were professional flight engineers. These are guys that were not pilots. They were systems people. A lot of them had a mechanic background, A&P backgrounds. And, because you are not flying. You're not touching the controls. You're there managing systems. And, but again, with automation and with the latest, the aircraft that are out there, that seat is no longer needed. It's as close to a Learjet as you can get in the airline world. It's a hot rod, especially depending on the engines that you have. American Airlines had Rolls-Royce engines on their 757s. Others have had, and I think it's General Electric, etc. The ones we had were just, they were rocket ships. And it's just an awesome airplane. I mean, everything Boeing is just a great airplane. But if you want to top that off, I mean, you go back to the 777. 777. That's the rock star of the airline business. I know of no person who has flown the 777. By the time you fly the 777, you've flown everything else because it's the biggest one that's out there. Other than Airbus A380, of course, which I think they've stopped making now. But the 777, by the time you get there, you have plenty of experience. And I know of no one, personally, I know of no one who says they would fly anything other than that. I mean, it's a cruise ship. So at all airlines, it's simply a game of seniority. Your seniority is a number that you carry. It's given to you the day you are hired, and it changes as people retire above you. But the guy above you will be above you, one number above you for the rest of your career. The guy below you will be one number below you till somebody retires. So when your seniority allows, if you choose, and some people choose not to do it, but most people want to fly bigger airplanes, go further, and do, make more money. And so that's how it's done. It's a game of seniority. For me, I stayed back a little longer than most because I really enjoyed seniority. So, in other words, if I'm on, let's say, a 757, 767, and I've become more and more senior. Now I have the opportunity to go on a 777, but be very junior. I may choose to just stay where I am because I want the better schedules. I don't want to fly up, all-nighters. I don't want to, commute or, a series of other things. So I may choose to be a senior guy and stay on the older airplane. Or I might be ambitious and want to go out there and rip roar through the whole thing. In that case, I'll just go on the first opportunity I get. I'll go on the next airplane, the next size, next seat, whatever it is. And then once you get to that point, once you're, so let's say you are in a 757 and you choose to go to a 777, your seniority allows it. They put in, computer bids once, every 2 or 3 months, and you get that bid. Now training is assigned to you. And airline pilots in the United States, anyhow, you can only fly one type of aircraft at a given time. Usually you can fly multiple types, but right now it's just one type. In other words, I'm a 757 captain until the day I go into school. Then I am no longer a 757 captain. I'm a 777 captain who is not, who's not qualified yet, who has to go through the entire training process. And then once you go through the training process, and then that's your seat, and that's where you're going to be until you make another change. And, then there's a training, of course. The training for American Airlines, I'm sure most airlines are not that dissimilar. It's around 30, 35 days. You go in, you spend 2 weeks in what they call ground school, where you sit down in class and you study systems. And, and then they have cockpit procedure trainers. CPTs, they call them. So you sit there, and then it's a layout of the cockpit with actual instruments, and you turn on a light switch, the appropriate lights come on, and then things happen. But it's just really just a piece of machine sitting in a classroom and has no other function. So when that's done, that portion of it is done. You go through your what they call the oral, and that's a test. It's a Federal Aviation Administration required test. You have to pass that, and as soon as that's done, now you're ready for phase 2. Phase 2 is always simulator training. Now, simulators, we use 3-axis, simulators that American has, and then almost all airlines do. And that's where the feel, everything that you do, you walk into, it's still nailed to the ground, but it's a big room, big box that is sitting on a series of, hydraulic lifts that are designed to take you in, make you feel exactly as you would, in the cockpit. And they're designed to create an environment that is very, very similar to the cockpit. And so you walk in, even though you're on the ground, you're sitting on the 3rd floor of some building somewhere. You walk in, you're exactly in the cockpit of that airplane. In fact, the training is so similar to the airplanes that the very first time that you fly an airplane with passengers on, that you touch the controls of an airplane is when you're with passengers. You don't ever take an airplane out and fly it around and feel it. The training is so precise that when I get there and for the first time I touch the real controls, passengers are right behind me loading up, boarding. This better be good. And so you go through 2 weeks of that, and then that's followed by a check ride. And when that portion is done, then there's a series of flights that you have to do depending on the seat and and where you're going to fly. And there you do that, American Airlines with check airmen, people that are qualified, other captains that are qualified that sit in the other seat. And they watch you and make sure that, you go through that process. And then once that's done, then, they'll give you the keys essentially, and you can go out and fly the airplane around. But even after that, there are some restrictions depending on the number of hours you have. So it's a steps-up process. You got to go through A to get to B, and B before you get to C. And by the time you get to the end of it, you're well qualified to be taking this airplane on and be responsible for it yourself. Mm-hmm. Probably a longer answer than you were expecting, but here we are.
Absolutely brilliant. But I think our viewers would love to know, myself included, what's a typical day for a 777 first officer or captain? How does that play out for you?
The thing about a 777 is it's a big airplane designed to go far distance. This is not something that you take from San Francisco to LA, unless you're trying to reposition the plane or something like that. So the old saying was every time you strapped a 777 to your butt, you went through a minimum of 8 time zones. Mm-hmm. So what's a typical day like? It's long, and a typical flight for us, for me, the LA-London was the shortest flight that we did. Other than occasionally did some domestic, but the shortest flight, and that's about 10 and a half hours one way, 11 and a half coming back. But most of our flights were longer than that. So the Far East, Deep South, South America, et cetera, were significantly further than that. It's a long day. And so depending on how long it is, the flights up to 8 hours, essentially, it just take 2 pilots. 8 to 12 hours, they take 1 extra guy. And over 12 hours, they take 2 extra guys. Mm-hmm. You'll be 3 or 4 of you in the cockpit. And, you take off. The most junior guy, most of the time, he goes back for his break. And for his break, he's got a room in the back there with a couple of beds and a couple of chairs, depending on the model of the 777 you're flying. And so he'll be there. And then, 3 hours later, 4 hours later, he'll come back, or the whole new crew will come back, and then you go back out there. And you hear those engines hum for the next, 10, 15, 20 hours. I don't know, 20, but 17 hours. I've done 17-hour, 10 flights, Delhi to Kennedy. It was a long, long flight.
Yeah.
What is it like? And by the time you get there, I mean, the jet lag does affect you. I always told people here, most of the flights to London left LA at about 6 in the evening. And so by the time we got there, it was, 3 or 4 in the afternoon, but it was 5 in the morning over here. So just as people are waking up here with to get a cup of coffee and a cereal, I had a shish kebab and a beer in my hands. What is it like? It's crazy.
But overall, did you enjoy, long haul flying sounds like, as you say, glamorous, but did you enjoy it in general?
Absolutely. Like I said, it's to be an airline pilot, it's a desire that most people, you either have it or you don't. I compare it often to being an actor, You either enjoy being in front of people and acting, or you just want to run away and hide in a closet, And so I've enjoyed the heck out of it, and I would do it all over again in a minute. It doesn't take away from the fact that it was hard. And it got harder as you age, especially the bigger airplanes. But it was a great time. I mean, I got to go places. I got to see things, and that is rare to be able to do that. I was coming to London 3 times a month, for 10 years, and that's pretty cool to be able to come in here and, sit down and have your favorite pub and fish and chips and all the stuff you're doing, and and then I come back and sleep your own bed 2 nights later.
Did you meet any celebrities, and how do you interact with them?
A great deal of them. We met a lot of them were excellent, and I met them both as flying for American Airlines, as well as before that when we were doing the Learjets. Flew a lot of celebrities. They were great. I mean, if they were with the American airline portion, you didn't really interact with them that much. Flight attendants would come up and tell you so-and-so is sitting there, usually in first class or business class. But as a Learjet pilot, I flew a lot of them, and they were great. there were a couple of exceptions that don't need to be named, but for the most part, they were great. I mean, I flew Charlton Heston and his wife for a number of weeks. And, on one of the flights, we were going somewhere to the East Coast. And at Lear, we started taking in smoke, just an oil, one of the oil lines, broke and created smoke. It wasn't a major emergency, but we needed to do something about it. So we dropped down and landed somewhere, but, we're still in the air and the cabin starts to fill up with smoke. And I should have turned around and said something to them. It's only like 6 or 8 seats in the back. But I didn't. I was very occupied with what I had to do. And I felt this tap on my shoulder here, and Kam, turn around, it's Charlton. Kam, is anything wrong? I'm like doing this through the smoke. No, nothing is wrong, Mr. Heston. We're good. Go back, sit down. We're going to go land somewhere. So that was the case. But one of my favorites was the Moody Blues, flying the Moody Blues.
Wow.
And I used to listen to these guys when I was 3 years old, when I flew them around a bunch, for their concerts. And, the lead guitarist, I forgot his name. I should, shame on me. He was sitting on his knees in a Lear between me and the first officer, all the way up to Northern California someplace. He is amazed by what I do. And I've been listening to him since I was in diapers. So, so I'm like, flew a lot of celebrities, generally not starstruck at all, but this was an exception, the Moody Blues. So we get over there and I really want to go see their concert. But of course, you're the pilot. How are you going to get up and go see their concert? They've got limos waiting for them. They go out there, they bring them back. I just blurted it out. I said, I'd love to come see your concert, but I'm sure it's sold out. It's sold out. I have a terrible English accent, so I won't attempt that, but sold out. He comes over, he grabs this ribbon from around his neck and puts it around mine. He says, you have a backstage pass for this entire tour, the rest of the tour. So I'm standing 20 feet away from these guys, watching them play Whites and Night Satin, and I'm just, that was one of the highlights.
So what was it like to transition from Boeing to Airbus, obviously the side stick? Did you find that difficult to adjust to?
The first day I showed up in class, and the instructor introduced himself to me, and he said, what airplane are you from? I said, 10 years in the right seat of a 777. Turned around to me, and the first thing out of his mouth, he said, you're going to have the hardest time of anyone who has gone through the school. He said, that's good to know. Let's just lay it on the ground right there, figure it out. You're not only going from the right seat to the left seat, to the captain's seat. You're not only going from, a yoke to a stick. You're going from, a complete different manufacturer of aircraft to a completely different one. It doesn't matter if you flew the 757, 67, 777, 87. They all were very similar, same as if you flew the Airbus 319, 20, 21. The 350s, the 380s, they're essentially the same thing, just a bigger version of the other one. Mm-hmm. But when you fly from one to the other, it's like, you're going from, riding a mule to driving a Corvette, but there's just completely different things. I don't mean either one of them is a mule, but I mean, really just the fact that they're very, very different. But wonderful airplanes. So hard to get used to. But once you got used to it, very dependable, easy to fly, and fun. And man, that tray is really nice to have, because in a Boeing for the rest of eternity, you're going to be eating on your pants, and, here you put your food on a tray or whatever you want. And it's great. I love them both. But I'm more of a Boeing fan, as most people are. Just kind of the way it is, just the way it's been laid out, something about it. But both of them wonderful airplanes.
So how long did you spend on Boeing aircraft, and how long did you spend on the Airbus aircraft?
The Airbus, well, American Airlines didn't have Airbus. They only had the 330 for decades, and it was a yoke thing. It was out of the East Coast mostly, not West Coast where I was at. So American really got into the Airbus action once it merged with US Air. And so that wasn't till, later in the game, only maybe, 10, 12 years ago. I got to spend 7 years of that 10 or 12 years. So a significant portion of it. Overall, 7 years on the Airbus, the other 28 in Boeing's at American Airlines. And of course, prior to that, it was just little airplanes. Anything that had an engine will go up in the air. And somebody would pay me for it.
Exactly. Yeah. So before we get into the personal questions here, Kam, did you ever work with any military pilots, and how did you interact on the on the flight deck?
Most of the people who flew with were military, especially when I first started. That was military was where airlines preferred to have their pilots from. Military was most selective, and of course their training was very, very thorough. That wasn't the case in general aviation. How did we interact? They were great. We were taught that the guy sitting next to you is really not all that relevant. It is the procedures that are to be followed. Mm-hmm. And so we both knew what the procedure was. Here's the verbal command, here's a response to it, here's when you do this, here's when you do that, and if that happens, you do this. As long as all of that was done and uniform, standardized, what they called, then it didn't matter who the guy was or who he wasn't. And by the time you got through the training with American Airlines, almost everybody was standardized. Everybody knew what they have to do at what kind of time and what kind of information. And so it didn't make much of a difference. And in terms of guys, they're all good guys. I mean, you get along with some people better than you get along with some others. There were occasional time when it was a very quiet cockpit, but most of the time really was fun and enjoyable. Mm-hmm. That's the same as anybody. You could go into any office and see who's gathered around the water cooler and who's talking to who and, who's not talking to. So similar to that. But all great pilots. They may have come to American Airlines with different backgrounds, but once you got in there, and I'm sure it's the same for other airlines as well, Delta, United, Southwest, etc. But once you got there and you got through the school, you got through the process, it really was the same. You were no longer, separated by, your background. You did what you did, and you did it, the way you're supposed to.
And one more question, actually, I just thought of. Is it actually true, chicken or fish for the first officer and captain? Is that actually true?
Yeah, it was actually chicken or steak.
That's right.
And since 30 or 40 years ago, when we didn't know any better, the senior captains always took the steak, and the junior guys always got the chicken. So the old thing for these guys was, the first 20 years of my life, I got the chicken because that's all I had to eat. The second 20 years, when I had the choice, I'm the senior guy. Now I got the chicken because I know that's better for you. So it's my whole career, I ate chicken. So, chicken or steak, pick a pick.
Kam, you're also an author. Let's talk about your book, Highwire. How did this come about, and when did you start writing it?
I started writing it 20 years ago. In fact, that was the original version that came out through Bantam and currently Random House. It's updated now with the information today, very appropriate for today's environment. It's been written, and like I said, updated. And it's essentially a story of Flight 394 in this last few minutes of, the book starts in the last few minutes before landing at New York Kennedy Airport in a blizzard. And when the aircraft stops responding to the captain's command, Captain Kate Gallagher, a woman, decides to purposefully crash the plane. And in that crash, 6 people die. And she's blamed for, the fact that she's a woman, the fact that she's not, competent. Maybe she was hired to fill a quota, et cetera, et cetera. And all through, no one understands, no one realizes that it was a computer virus that had affected the computers, the electronics in the computers of the aircraft. And had she not crashed it at the moment she did, And had she continued to go, the aircraft would have taken, would have climbed, would have been over New York City, and would have crashed there, which would be, beyond catastrophic. Mm-hmm. And so she has to spend her time through the book trying to prove herself while she's blamed for what has happened, and humiliated for not being Sully. And, until she ends up coming face to face with the guy who created the virus. And there she learns that there is another aircraft that's contaminated halfway over the Atlantic. And it turns out through her background and the situation she is their only hope. And now in the view of the whole world, she has to go out there and try and save them. But she's going to run out of fuel while she does that. And she probably has to give up her life in order to be able to do that.
Wow. It sounds like there's a movie in there, Kam.
There, it's being shopped around as we speak.
Great stuff. So where can we find your books and yourself online?
The book is everywhere. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of the portals that are out there. It's in hardback, paperback, audiobook, ebooks, etc. For as far as me, just kammajd.com. Just KAMMAJD.com, and that's my website. I update it with media events that occur with any kind of an event that's related to this first book. And the next one, Silent Voices, that's the next one's coming out shortly. And so that's a place to take a look for it.
Brilliant stuff there, Kam. But I've got a few personal questions while we wrap up this interview. So do you have any hobbies?
Well, writing is now taking over most of what was once hobbies. I'm like most people. I dabble on a few things here. I love skiing. Done martial arts for many, many years. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. Love movies, and got to have a movie once a week. Got pretty tough during COVID. Able to see them, and so they're not always quality movies because you don't get a quality movie coming out every week. But
no.
We will. I enjoy that kind of movies. Anything with the word star in it, or an airplane in it, or anything like that, I'm the first one in.
Yeah. So, what do you think about Top Gun 2 or Top Gun Maverick?
Oh, I thought it was great. I wasn't. Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of the first one. I mean, it was a little bit more cliche-ish on the first one, I thought, but the second one was entertaining as hell. The flying, of course, is always amazing, but the storyline drew me in. On the first one, the storyline did not draw me in, and it's difficult to say, okay, America has got, these aircraft carriers that are going in against, somebody in the Middle East that's going to come in and try and fight. It just wasn't real to me.
Yeah.
It was very cartoonish on the first one. But the second one, it was very real. It felt real. And again, I got drawn in. I'm into character-driven stories. I need to be, it's all CGI and all of that. It doesn't do a whole lot for me.
Yeah.
But it was fantastic. I thought it was great. And Tom Cruise, he's, I started studying a little bit more of some of what he does, his own crazy stunts and all that. I mean, that guy deserves some respect.
Absolutely. This could be a difficult one or an easy one for you, Kam. Favorite aircraft you have flown?
Favorite aircraft? It's 777. It's there's no question about it. Like I was telling you earlier, I think 9 out of 10 people who have flown 777, they're going to say it's a 777. It's beautiful, it is massive. It is, you can't screw up a landing on it. It has so many wheels, something is going to touch the ground first.
Yeah.
It's about as comfortable as it gets. It's fast. It flies, high. The rides are smooth. The bunk beds are great. 777 hands down.
One you would like to fly, either past or present?
I don't really much care as long as I get to be at destination more than 22 hours. That's most of the time when we went somewhere, you're only there for a day, and regardless of whether you're ready or not, you got to come back. Now I'm just enjoying going, like I'm going to London here now, and then I'm going to stay in that area for 3 weeks. I don't have to worry about, being heavy-headed and busy and trying to come back here with time zone changes. So just doesn't much matter. Bigger airplanes are always favored. Of course, the further you got to go, but the rides are more comfortable, and so I'm a fan of those. But I like to go there and spend some time. It turns out that I like traveling, after all of this.
Absolutely. So, are you on social media, like, are you on Instagram or Twitter or anything like that, Kam?
Yeah, all of that. Kam Majd's books, or at Kam Majd's books. I'm not massively educated on that, so there are people far better than me that are doing all of that for me, thankfully. But yes, Instagram, Facebook, all of it, TikTok, etc. Yeah.
And we'll link everything Kam's mentioned in the description below. But Kam, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk about your flying career.
Thank you very much for having me, Mike. I've enjoyed it.
Cheers.